We got the FOMC minutes today. The market had been selling off. We continue to see the tech sell off. We had a pretty big sell off at the lows, had the attempted rebound before the Fed minutes came out. Ended up rebounding off of the lows of the session, getting some possible bottoming tails. But we get stuff like this, and the stuff released before the Fed minutes and earlier in the week. The herd's narrative is, oh, we're going to get this September cut, just like they always say. Always. Fed's going to cut. The economy is great. They're going to cut. I keep telling you, the Fed is worried about inflation. I told you inflation's going to tick back up. Oh, what's happening? Inflation's ticking back up. And the Fed is worried about, especially Powell, he's worried about Trump's tariffs causing inflation. But you get like this kind of stuff. Wall Street is pricing in that a rate cut will be announced at Jackson Hole Summit on Friday. Fed Watch Tool, the odds are 83% that we'll get a cut in September. Well, odds were very high the last several meetings too, but again, Powell dashed hopes. But Wall Street and the crypto community, they're addicted to the Fed's stimulus. They believe it's bullish because of what happened in 2020 and 2021. That's an outlier. Usually the Fed rate cuts are associated with bear. Saw with the CPI, the odds of a percent cut in September rise to about 98%, and then it dropped back down. When we got the PPI, it had dropped to the low 90s, down 93, 92%. It's been gradually coming down. It was at 84.9% before the FOMC minutes. Now it's a little bit lower. One cut in September and maybe one more cut later in October or December, less than a 50% chance. So right now we're back down to one cut, maybe two. This was before the FOMC minutes, 84.9%. After the release of the FOMC minutes, then began to decline. By the close, we're down to 81.1% for a September cut. So it's drifted back down, and the cut for October is now gone. Now there's less than a 50% chance of a December cut. So we're at one cut, maybe two, but less than a 50% chance of two. And again, this is Fed Fund Futures. It changes every single day. This is the betting markets. These are the people that are telling us, oh, yeah, at the beginning of the year, yeah, we're going to get, 6, 7 cuts this year. And here we are in, August, and have the Fed heading started to cut there, and then they've been paused all year long. They cut right before the election, and then they've been paused. And again, Powell's worried about Trump's tariffs causing inflation. Again, if Powell takes a hawkish tone, this is likely going to get canceled out. There may be a delayed reaction to it, depending on when Trump gives us more tariff news about the semiconductors. We already had earlier in the week, we had the tariff news about steel and aluminum. The market didn't like that. Seeing a tech sell-off here. Trump taking the market down. NVIDIA selling off, taking the market down. What I'm trying to tell you is, even if we don't get an immediate reaction to maybe what Powell says, Trump's going to come out and rattle the market with his tariffs, and then they're going to go, oh, more tariffs. Powell's going to be afraid of cutting rates, and again, it's likely going to cancel the September cut. Predicted last week that this week and next week we're going to have Trump and Powell rattling the markets. Trump's going to talking about different tariffs, some this week, maybe some next week. See when he gives us the news about the semiconductor tariffs. Should be any day this week or next week. Market got bottoming tails today, hammer candlesticks, and I just want to show you just real fast a good example on Bitcoin. Sometimes bottoming tails can mark bottoms, like over here. Other times, they can give you a counter trend. We had a bottoming tail here. We got a counter trend, and then we resumed the decline. Had a bottoming tail right here, rebounded for a day, and then resumed the decline. We had a bottoming tail recently, a couple of days ago on Bitcoin, and with the hammer, it didn't get confirmed. Now we're back at support. So we're a bottoming tail where you rise a day or two, like right here, and then you end up falling more. So we'll be watching to see what happens with today's bottoming tails. But I wanted to show you that good example on Bitcoin. But the S&P did get a bottoming tail today under the 20-period moving average, tagging the lower boundary of the cloud. We had a sell-off, and we started recovering ahead of the release of the FOMC minutes. Right about that time, the S&P was down about 25, 26 points. We ended down nearly 16 by the close, but above our 20-period moving average, getting a possible bottoming tail. Again, the recent bottoming tail on Bitcoin failed. You can get bottoming tails like what we had over here in July, where you get a bottoming tail and it's followed by a rally. You can get bottoming tails where, like I showed you on Bitcoin, where you can get a counter trend rally. But we did have sell-off. We started to see signals on S&P go bearish, but then we recovered. We didn't get a bearish reversal of conditions, flipping momentum. We're below the 10-period moving average. Headline you see right there tried to take out the 20-period, the blue line, but closed below the 20-period moving average. Our divergence has given us the sell-off, that multiple point divergence on the MACD, awesome oscillator. Lo and behold, NVIDIA did the same thing. This is why the market did what it did. It's following NVIDIA. NVIDIA sold off sharply. The dip was bought. If we rally back up, we are below the 10 and 20 period. The 10's turning down. If we do rally back up, we could see a rally to the moving averages, which eventually get a bearish cross. NVIDIA's lost the cloud here in the daily time frame. If we do rally back up, the moving averages in the cloud are resistance, which could get a bearish cross. We're seeing the divergence on NVIDIA begin to play out here with this sell-off, broken the trend line that I talked about in yesterday's video. So again, it's very likely with NVIDIA breaking that trend line, the market will now correct. NVIDIA was down sharply today, but recovered and only ended down 0.14%. Again, turning off of major resistance with this negative divergence here on the RSI and a larger divergence with the price oscillator. We're getting that bottoming tail just above our 50-period moving average. Earnings is next week with NVIDIA, so do keep that in mind. But we broke down from this trend line, and I told you if once we break this trend line, NVIDIA will likely correct. The market should follow suit. We broke down briefly, just a small breach of the trend line, back tested it, and then we turned it down. So we've had this sell-off for 2 days. Pretty sharp decline yesterday, pretty sharp decline today, but today we recovered. So again, I think it's likely to end up getting a bigger sell-off towards the 200, maybe in between the 50 and the 200 here, but probably bigger sell-off just these 2 days, what we've seen so far. I think it'll go a couple weeks, and I think we'll likely see a bottom in September if we get the sell-off going. And again, the seasonality was suggesting an August sell-off. It's been delayed. I think we're still getting it here. NVIDIA getting a bottoming tail at the lower Bollinger Band. If it rallies, watch the 10 and 20 period moving average in the cloud up here at this 179 to 181 area or so. Here's a NASDAQ close-up. Again, NASDAQ's 100 still ended down 135 points. It still ended down 0.58%, but it was closer to down 2% at the lows of the session, right around 1.87% or so, nearly 2% at the lows of the session, getting a bottoming tail and rebounding back up. We've dropped now from last Wednesday. 6 sessions ago, we got that black candlestick from that high and slammed into major resistance. We've now dropped 4.30% from the high to the low. So we've had in the last 6 trading sessions that reversal candlestick. We've now dropped 4.30%. We were told this wasn't going to happen, no possible way. And again, I've talked about the resistance levels. We slammed into it here, we slammed into it here, and we turned back up only to form this divergence here on the RSI. But you got a bottoming tail. We've now dropped 4.30%. Can we get a bounce? Again, the 10-period moving average, we're below the 20-period here, the blue line. We rally back up. Now the cloud here and the 10-period, this is resistance up here. At the lower end of it, you've got the 20-period and the lower portion of the cloud, which is now turning bearish, or momentum cloud. So a bottoming tail on NVIDIA, bottoming tails on the NASDAQ and S&P. Just back to the S&P, NASDAQ peaked 6 trading days ago, dropped 4.30%. The S&P peaked last Friday, 4 sessions ago. It's dropped 2.20%, hitting the lower end of the cloud here. Seeing a tech sell-off. Actually, I think we get a bigger sell-off. Bottoming tails could give us a rebound as we've dropped 2.20% on the S&P and we've dropped 4.3% in the last 6 sessions on the NASDAQ. NASDAQ and S&P is stalling at major resistance with our log scaling here in the weekly time frame. Climbed into it last week here with our linear trend line from the 2023 low on the S&P. Here is that 2023 trend line on the daily chart from the 2023 low connecting to the low here in the summer of 2024. We slammed into it here in July. We're now slamming into it here in August and turning off of it, and that's forming the divergence. It's likely that this resistance will give us a reaction to the 50 or the 200 period moving average. Got to see all the signals turn bearish on the S&P. We've got that on the NASDAQ dropping 4.30%, but the S&P is dodging a reversal of conditions today with the bottoming tail. Turn bearish on NASDAQ, but the S&P is still hanging in there. We got to see momentum and trend signals turn bearish the S&P to validate a bigger sell-off. The signal's still hanging in there, and momentum is still bullish with the bullish reversal of conditions. See the signals, momentum signals and trend signals all begin to turn bearish if we're to have a bigger sell-off. Now, we got the reversal of conditions with momentum with NASDAQ. We got the bearish momentum line with NASDAQ, and trend signals have followed, but we don't have it with the S&P yet. The momentum line here, still bullish. We attempted to get a bottoming tail, but it's got to get confirmation or fall through if it's going to mean anything. Again, S&P could join the NASDAQ and see momentum flip, and trend signals could start flipping. We are seeing momentum go negative now with this divergence with momentum that has formed, very similar to Awesome Oscillator and the MACD. Momentum did the same thing, but it's going negative. NASDAQ had the divergence with momentum. It gave us this 4.30% sell-off so far. We've had a reversal of conditions with momentum. We've had the momentum line turn bearish. We'll see if the S&P follows suit. I told you that could happen today or tomorrow or at some point this week. Momentum has turned bearish on NASDAQ. S&P could quickly follow. Got a warning sign last Wednesday for the NASDAQ. Possible peak. Now bars here turning back to red. NASDAQ's dropped 4.30%. S&P got the signal on Friday, and they diverged from one another. This is saying we're going to get a bigger pullback or reversal or maybe just a small pullback, but so far it's correct. S&P's dropped over 2%. Please support the channel with the link directly below. That allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, please let me know that by supporting the channel today. I thank you for your consideration for that. If momentum turns bearish, still hanging in there with the S&P 500. See momentum turn bearish, trend signals turn bearish, then we'll see the S&P trend turn bearish, and we'll move into a risk-off environment. We're still in a risk-on environment. Got to see momentum flip if we're going to get a sell-off here. S&P risk model here. Some signals tried to flip today at the lows of the session, but we couldn't get the momentum flipping. The bearish signals that started were prevented from taking place by the end of the session. We do have a neutral trend, green cloud, the green bars are gone. We have a neutral warning that we could move into bearish trend. Over here we started getting warning signs, but we didn't move into the bearish trend. Signals have been bullish all the way up until we got that reversal with my trend signals on July 31st down to that August low. We formed a divergence now, so do we see this begin to play out? Watch today's bottoming tails. Turned bearish for the NASDAQ. The S&P had tried to do it at the lows of the session, but it was prevented from happening with the bottoming tail that formed. We're just above the 50 period here on the NASDAQ. Again, we popped up here, got a bullish reversal of conditions, formed the divergence on the RSI, and another reference point here on the Awesome Oscillator. This divergence right here gave us this push down saw signals go bearish for a few days. Momentum flipped right back to bullish. Now it's back to bearish again. Pretty good drop on the NASDAQ, dropping 4.30% from the high to the low so far, but a bottoming tail again. Nothing goes straight up, nothing goes straight down. I think we're going to correct, but then eventually go make new highs, as I've said. But I'm looking for a move that will eventually take us under the 50-period moving average and move towards the 200. I don't know that we reach it. May find a bottom somewhere in between, but I do think we will get a bigger correction than what we've seen so far. Forget at the peak, at least the peak so far, 6 days ago, NASDAQ didn't make a new high. They diverged. That is, the S&P and the NASDAQ diverged from one another. S&P made a new high last Friday. The NASDAQ did not. Now, S&P got that red bar yesterday after the NASDAQ had already gotten it on Monday. We got it on Tuesday yesterday on the S&P 500. Tried to take out the lower boundary of the cloud. We couldn't do it. Got a red bar. At a bottoming tail. Now, again, the bottoming tail means nothing unless it gets confirmation and a follow-through. If we don't get confirmation, we can still go lower and closer to the 50. The NASDAQ can take it out. We're seeing the stochastic break the 80 level now. And again, we've had that another reference point of the divergence on the MACD and the awesome oscillator. We got that divergence on the RSI. In order for momentum to shift, we've got to close below the lower boundary of the cloud here. We dropped below the 20, but got back above it, but we're still below that 10 period. So we've got to see the momentum shift if we're going to get a bigger sell-off again towards the 50 or under it, moving towards the 200 or maybe towards the 200 period moving average. Again, get a bigger correction than what we've seen so far, but then I think we'll go make new highs. S&P daily here. Let me just show you the intraday charts. The S&P had that peak last Friday. We got the black candlestick. It was a gap and trap. We dropped below the 200, the black line. The 50 eventually dropped below it. And again, it's been resistance here. We're now rallying back up to just underneath it. You got a possible rising wedge, or maybe, again, it's not done and we get a bear flag if we don't see the bottoming tail play out and it fails like Bitcoin's recent bottoming tail did earlier in the week. If you're going to recover, you got to be able to get back above the 200 period here, and the 50 down here has got to get back above the 200 if you're going to attempt a recovery here in the 5-minute time frame. S&P came down on the 15-minute chart towards this gap over here from August 8th. We came down towards that level. To rebound, we're rallying into that 200 on the 5-minute chart, rallying into the 50 here in the 15-minute time frame. We got that death cross the cloud. We're holding below the cloud. We had that peak, and we had formed a divergence on the RSI and the MACD up here last Friday. So that's what's going on here. Now, again, we could be forming a rising wedge or a bear flag if we stall surrounding the 50 here and the 200 on the 5-minute chart, or maybe go a little higher and then have the rally fail. If the bottoming tails fail, you can get a bigger counter trend or attempt to recover if you try to challenge the high from last Friday. But right now, you could get rejection off of the cloud, off of these levels of 50. You could end up forming a divergence before all is said and done here and end up taking out this level here that we hit the low today at this gap fill, and even get a bigger sell-off moving towards the gap back over here from August. Remember, we had peaked July 31st with the gap and trap. We gapped down. We had a sharp gap lower, and then we had that gap back up after the August 1st low there on Friday, August 1st, and then we've had this recovery. That has formed the divergence on the daily chart. So if you take out this level here that we're trying to bounce off of, then doors open for something bigger. You know, we have some support levels just under this level. We have a gap support for that rebound off of the August 1st low, and then we have the August 1st low gap. So if we do go lower and signals do remain bearish, just some levels to be watching. If we form a divergence or end up getting a bigger sell-off without forming a divergence, if the indicators just start moving to new lows. But we do have, again, possible divergences that could form on these intraday charts, if this is nothing more than a counter trend. Sell-off's taken us back to the 200 period here on the 60-minute chart. The divergence gave us a sell-off of over 2% on the S&P, but in order to get a bigger sell-off, you've got to take out that 200 period moving average. We're below the 50, but you got to take out the 200, and then the 50's got to cross below it. MACD's moved back into negative territory, so there's a risk of taking out that 200 period, but you've got a bottoming tail in the daily time frame. We'll be watching that. Again, the candlestick means nothing unless it gets confirmation and a follow through. I saw the S&P get rejection at the upper Bollinger Band. It's broken. The rising trend line, we had the previous rising trend line break back test, but there was, and got a confirmation, but no follow through. We rebounded back up. We formed this divergence, and now we're breaking the trend line from that low right there. And did that yesterday, coming down though, and trying to rest on the lower end of the momentum cloud. If you break the 20 period of the momentum cloud, again, eventually I think we're moving back to the trending cloud, probably dropping under the 50 period moving average, moving towards the 50 or moving towards the 200 here. The black line, the 100 period is the pink line. I think you'll get a bigger pullback than what we've seen so far, and then I think you get one final thrust higher. My Elliott wave count, if we have completed primary wave 3, we've got to see the signals turn bearish on NASDAQ or S&P. We've seen it on NASDAQ, but P dodged the bullet today with getting a reversal of conditions. If it does turn bearish, again, we'll have confirmation to the breakdown of the trend line. We can get the wave 4 and then later wave 5. And I think that that's going to take us into September, October, November somewhere. And then I think the stock market will peak and put in a top. I think Bitcoin suggesting the time is short. And again, the Bitcoin and the market have a positive correlation. Bitcoin suggesting, as I recently made a video showing some data, how long the bull markets last with Bitcoin. And if it does come to a conclusion by the end of this year, October, November, December, stock market's likely going to peak right along with it or shortly thereafter. NASDAQ also turning off the trend lines. This is a linear scaling, the weekly time frame, and here's the log scaling. Again, NASDAQ turning off the trend line. S&P and NASDAQ turning off trend lines in the weekly time frame. I think we pull back and then we go higher to some of these longer term trend lines. NASDAQ 15 rallying right into the 50 period moving average, right into the cloud. Again, could form a divergence if we get another leg down on the MACD and the RSI before we get any kind of a bigger bounce. Although with the bottoming tails, you got a shot at it here. You don't have to form a divergence, but often you do. 15-minute chart of the NASDAQ. NASDAQ broke that trend line. Again, went a little bit higher, got the black candlestick, broke the trend line from the low that we had on August 1st. You had a rising wedge, but it expanded into a larger pattern that's broken down now. Still might try to go up and back test the trend line if the bottoming tail gives us a rally. So we'll be watching the NASDAQ closely. It has dropped 4.30%. When Trump announces his semiconductor tariffs, I think we'll see the market, the tech sector, sell off further. It can be this week or next week. We've already had, earlier this week, again, the steel and aluminum tariffs. The market didn't like that. I don't think that's the conclusion of the correction, okay? We've seen a drop on NASDAQ of 4.30%. I do think we're going back closer towards the cloud, probably under the 50 period moving average, maybe towards the 200 or 100 period moving average, but I don't think it's done yet. And again, then I think once it is done, we'll get a bigger move higher. Then I think the market will top in the coming months ahead. See what becomes of the bottoming tail here. S&P is at that 200 period on the 60-minute chart. NASDAQ just took it out here and again diverge from one another, so we'll be watching. We are under the cloud here. We are under the 200 period. If we try to go back above it, the 50 and the cloud are now resistance for the NASDAQ here in the 60-minute time frame. Again, we reached extremes on these 60-minute charts. You might end up seeing divergences develop before we get a bigger bounce, but we did attempt to get some bottoming tails in the daily time frame. It's going to be like our bottoming tail from earlier in the week with Bitcoin, where it doesn't get confirmation and a fall through and we go lower. Will the bottoming tails give us a bounce? NASDAQ 60-minute chart here.